Thank you for the chance to share some insights from our present research on unpacking presidential support. This is research funded by the Ateneo de Manila University, and it is organized under the aegis of the Ateneo Policy Center. These discussions and individual interviews were conducted as preliminary background examination or formative research from a broader research agenda comprised of national surveys and other methods. Its motivation is to examine the drivers of the extraordinarily resilient support of the current president and his administration. The more critical long-term motivation is the extent to which we would consider this support for the man and his policies as an erosion of public faith in democratic norms and values. Such an erosion would signal a more enduring phenomenon, of which the main sources are probably less about the current personalities and more about the preference for certain styles of leadership, decision-making, and principles. The method of interviewing we do is more probing, much more open-ended, and allows the participants to answer in their own words and reflect their own thinking, rationales, and logics. FGDs and KIIs were conducted with 34 individuals, purposively selected to include soft supporters, such as those who did not vote for him but say they support him, are politically disinterested or centrist but express support, those who voted for him but changed their minds, and some who we would consider hardcore supporters. There are many insights from these interviews. We highlight the ones here that strike us as unusual or unexpected. First, how do supporters view the rough language often used? This is to them a signal of authenticity. Pinuno na nagpapakatotoo. Overly prepared and slick, polished politicians are viewed as putting on a show or a selling point, using fancy words but not really doing anything in the end to improve the lives of people. Gusto nila na may tunay na malasakit sa tao. This is intangible and really has to do with authenticity and genuineness in communicating. Second, there is an A for effort kind of reasoning. People give a lot of credit for trying very hard and looking like they are trying very hard, no matter if the efforts are successful. Third, those who are not hardcore supporters do not feel strongly for the man, for or against. But if asked, they say they support him. Government help is good if it's there, but they are used to taking care of themselves anyway. Next, even soft supporters find it distasteful to hear strong criticism of the government. They think that it is the duty of citizens to support the administration, whoever it is. The authority appeal seems to be that leaders know better. They have wisdom that common people do not. They are in the position, and it is the obligation of citizens to support them. Citizens who do not support leaders are being bad citizens. For those who changed their minds already, they can pinpoint that they changed their minds when they lost trust in him. They do not trust that he will put the interests of the country first before China. He cannot be trusted to not favor his friends, even if it is against the interests of the country. What gets people angry, a useful emotion and one that kicks people into action, is when they see unequal application of the law, of unfairness, like the Mañanita, how Duque was dealt with, and loyalty to friends over country. We call this particular kind of logic fatalism, and when people talk about their support and how we should just accept it, it is usually in the context of a religious argument. In sum, that God put him there, God must have a plan. The president was voted by the wisdom of the voters, so his will represent the will of the people. We should be happy with what we were given. We should honor the wishes of the Lord. A curious thing, although probably not statistically relevant in the big picture, is that we have a handful of respondents who support Duterte but did not vote for him. They voted for Miriam in the group that we interviewed. The commonality is their irreverence, their willingness to speak their minds in a blunt and impolite way. To read the quote, I voted for MDS noon and APC. Sabi ko, Vox Populi, Vox Dei. Yan ang binoto ng tao, ng majority of people. I believe na God intervened, kaya siya nanalo. Tapos si MDS nga, nagkasakit. I believe that responsible citizens should be respectful of the president. Pag may achievement, we should praise and support them. It's better to support than di ka magtitiwala sa government. We also found, perhaps not so surprisingly, that people, even those who are not hardcore supporters, have a visceral defensive reaction against those being critical of the government. Upon probing, it seems it is related to this belief that it is the duty of citizens to support the government. A question here is whether there is something that has become part of the political values of the voters, that they have lost their tolerance, lost the appreciation for hearing disagreeing views. Even if someone agrees with your views, they cannot react negatively to you openly, because openly disagreeing with someone else is not a good thing. It is impolite to openly debate and disagree. If this was the case, the question is this new? Have Filipinos over the last 3 decades learned this intolerance for disagreement? This is an important area to investigate because democracy relies on open debate in order to work, and social norms that constrain this should be re-examined. These same points apply to the president. There is trust in the president to make the right decisions for the good of the common people because he is the product of the wisdom of the majority. He is also trying very hard and is constantly being criticized and disrespected. It is as if they feel they need to come to his defense. We can't tell if this type of reasoning is new and inspired by this specific politician, or if this is applicable to all. The possible practical use of this information is that it can help inform the positioning and framing of messages to allow more people to listen without putting up defensive walls in their minds. Distrust of the media is a deeply problematic issue that creates or fuels broader issues of democratic health, strength of institutions, values placed on accountability and transparency. Participants, even if they are not hardcore supporters of the president, believe that media are biased and selective. There is little sympathy for ABS-CBN and no appreciation for the impact of its disappearance on press freedom. The implication here is that they will readily trust information that comes directly from the source more than information they get from media, which in some measure allowed for the takeover of PCOO of almost all communication from the national government to the public. We directly asked the question of whether they would support a term extension. Since these are supporters, many of those interviewed readily said yes. The model of Singapore is mentioned often. If it's a good president, then they should stay for life. Not everybody believes this president is the one to do that, but a number of soft supporters do. This reasoning may be the basis for the messaging that the problems of the country are too big to fix in just 6 years. It seems an effective basic argument for extending a term if this administration is the right one to fix the big problems, and the problems are too big and numerous to address in 6 years, then logically a term extension is the solution. Otherwise, the gains are lost. The response to the COVID pandemic has been, in the eyes of some, dismal. In the eyes of the people we spoke with, quite good under the circumstances. They say that the government deserves credit because it is clearly a situation that was unforeseen, massive in scale, and global, and something nobody could have been prepared for. The government deserves extra credit because it is not fair to expect them to know what to do in these impossible times. Those who were former hardcore supporters were less forgiving. They are angry that there is no plan. They are angry that Duque is not getting fired. They see it all as having the people in power not playing by the same rules as officials, and that officials like the police are abusing their powers. The economy is not something they think the government can fix. it seems to be viewed as this big, separate, uncontrollable entity that is beyond the control of officials. At the end of all of these discussions, one of the questions that arose for us is whether these threads or reasoning we see in the soft supporters are coping mechanisms. That somehow in the language they use, it is as if accepting everything, including poor governance and leadership, is a virtue, and seeing the positive in everything is a virtue. The more things feel out of their control, the more important it is to remain optimistic and hopeful, because the alternative is emotionally difficult to grasp. These are related to concepts of political efficacy or political agency. If citizens do not believe they as individuals have some control or agency over the kind of government response they will receive, then criticizing or demanding more is seen as not only pointless, but also counterproductive. We asked the specific question among those who have friends who are hardcore supporters, why they think that support for the president still remains strong despite everything. The answer that often came up was pride. Supporting the president so publicly and strongly means that they have invested in their identity in this choice. So to admit that they were wrong is no small thing. In the words of our participants, hindi nila matanggap na naloko sila, hindi aamin na nagkamali sila. This is likely applicable only for those who voted for the president and those who have been very public with their circles for support. It may still be worth thinking about ways to make people feel safe to disagree with policies or decisions, while still maintaining the sense that they have not publicly changed their minds about the person they voted for. Participants were also asked about their opinions regarding the drug war and the killings. In these discussions, two key things emerged. First, the president is never considered responsible for not only the drug war failures, but also other failures. The killings are the fault of abusive police. The shortcomings on COVID response are the fault of Duque and others. This is the case for most anything that we discuss that are not working well. He is considered absolved of responsibility, and in fact, they feel pity for the president because he is being victimized by people who are abusive around him, and that is very hard to deal with. Second, and something that also has implications on other issues, is that several people say, malungkot yung mga pangyayari. The word malungkot is used often. They are sad about the failures, they are sad about the abuses, sad about the scale of the COVID pandemic. Supporters do not cross over the being angry about it. Those who have changed their minds, or ex-supporters, are angry. Sadness is an emotion that doesn't inspire action. It signals acceptance and resignation. There are indications in many of these conversations that participants have a supportive view about a central authority or authoritarian type of leadership. They would not label it authoritarian necessarily, but some would say things like a president is doing his job if he can get control over legislature and put them all in line, that media should cooperate with the government, or that we should all just support the president. They want a president who can just get the job done. Politics is viewed as unproductive, fighting, and getting everybody in line is again a virtue because it is above the politics. On the other hand, those who used to support the administration and have changed their mind articulate their resistance to dictatorship in terms of fairness and having blinders. This is a quote from a participant who used to support Duterte. It reflects the way they interpret authoritarianism. Pag kaibigan mo si Marcos, lahat ay positive. Pero pag kalaban ka, laging negative. That's how a dictatorship is. That's how authoritarians rule. Finally, to conclude, this research is really exploratory and formative. We don't claim these to be representative of broader populations, but these qualitative, open-ended interviews are valuable ways to show us what needs to be measured in a survey form and how these measures can be designed. In particular, moving forward, we have a keen interest in looking at emotion, what kinds of emotions are being felt, who and what are these emotions attached to, and what kinds of emotions drive people to action. Further, it is interesting to examine the notion of political agency and whether it is a shared and widespread belief that citizens are being irresponsible when criticizing or exercising their political agency. Finally, we want to understand how prevalent the support for authoritarian styles of leadership is and what norms of democratic systems remain in the public psyche. This is useful data to help inform civic and citizenship education in the future. Thank you very much for the chance to share some of our emerging research, and I look forward to our discussion.